Well, as we've heard from Peter, the new wave of occultism that spread from continental Europe to England was largely due to Eliphas Levi, whose works were translated by Arthur Edward Waite, which, as Peter reminded me earlier, Crowley used to refer to him as dead Waite. Were you using the Waite translations? They were your own? Yeah, okay, great, just checking. So, according to Levy, the tarot was a miraculous work which inspired all the sacred books of antiquity and is the most perfect instrument of divination by the analogical precision of its figures and numbers, as we've just heard. And he'd explored the correlation between individual cards, the Hebrew alphabet, and the Kabbalah. So, it was known as either the Tarot of the Bohemians, due to a perceived association with gypsies, or the Book of Thoth, adopting the principles of Hermeticism, which associated the Egyptian god Thoth or Tahuti and the Greek god Hermes and his Roman counterpart Mercury. In England, probably the most significant magical organisation promulgating the occult tarot was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1888 by three Freemasons, William Robert Woodman, William Wynne Westcott, and Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers. Notable members included W.B. Yeats, Florence Farr, Mather's future wife Moina Bergson, and Annie Horniman. The Golden Dawn was comprised of a hierarchy of degrees divided into outer and inner orders. Initiates received a series of secret manuscripts to study for each grade, one of which was Book T, Mather's own interpretation of the tarot. A. Waite initially joined the Golden Dawn in January 1891, but suspended his membership in 1893 just before being initiated into the inner order. He was readmitted in February 1896. Aleister Crowley, who had previously approached Waite for magical advice, was initiated into the Golden Dawn in November 1898 and rose swiftly through the grades until he was expelled in 1900. He subsequently established his own magical order, the AA, and later assumed leadership of the Order Templi Orientis, into which he incorporated elements of the Golden Dawn structure and course of study. Waite and Crowley each created a tarot modelled on the Golden Dawn Book T, and each engaged the services of an established female artist to execute their designs, Pamela Coleman Smith and Frida Lady Harris. In this talk, I will compare the relationship between the Magus and his muse in the production of the two most significant tarots of the 20th century. Due to the growing fascination with Egypt in esoteric circles, early proponents of the occult tarot, as we've heard, such as Itea and Court de Gebelin, concluded that this was where its origins could be found. However, the earliest Waite could trace it back was the 14th century, and he concluded there was no particle of evidence for the Egyptian origin of tarot cards. And Crowley came to a similar conclusion, noting that although some authorities seek to put it back as far as the ancient Egyptian mysteries, the tarot, getting ahead of myself, the tarot in what may be called the classical form was a product of the 14th century. Regardless of its origins, Waite believed that although the tarot has been, is, and will be used for divination, it belongs to another realm and began therein. The tarot is not, by attribution or otherwise, a derivative of any one school or literature of occultism, but the presentation of universal ideas by universal types, and it is in the combination of these types, if anywhere, that it presents secret doctrine. Crowley also realized that the symbolism of the tarot could be applied to all aspects of Western and Eastern mysticism, including the I Ching that we heard about earlier. He wanted to produce an encyclopedia of all serious occult philosophy, which would determine the entire course of mystical and magical thought for the next 2,000 years. Pamela Coleman Smith's parents were American of British immigrant descent, and her childhood had been spent variously in England, Jamaica, and New York, where she studied art and illustration at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. In 1899, she and her father made an extended visit to England and Ireland, where they got to know the Yeats family. Smith became deeply involved in the Celtic revival and through W.B. Yeats was initiated into the Golden Dawn in 1901. However, she chose to remain at the first or zelator grade rather than progress any further through the degrees. This is her illustration for Yeats's play, The Land of Heart's Desire. In 1903, following a schism which split the factions within the Golden Dawn, Waite established his new independent and rectified right, more aligned with Christian mysticism and the Arthurian tradition. Despite her friendship with Yeats, Smith chose to follow Waite, finding herself more in sympathy with his vision of the mysteries. Waite describes her as a most imaginative and abnormally psychic artist who had drifted into the Golden Dawn and loved its ceremonies without pretending or indeed attempting to understand their subsurface consequence. Waite intended to create a new tarot to rectify the symbolism by references to channels of knowledge which are not in the open day. And he believed that under the proper guidance, Smith could produce a tarot with an appeal in the world of art and a suggestion of significance behind the symbols, which would put them on another construction than had ever been dreamed by those who had produced and used them for mere divinatory purposes. Whether or not she drifted into the Golden Dawn, Waite considered Smith to be deeply versed in the subject, and he duly engaged her services. And she described the commission to her New York agent, Alfred Stieglitz, as a big job for very little cash. Crowley also engaged a professional artist, enlisting the help of his friend, critic and writer Clifford Bax. But unlike Waite, Crowley determined that whoever he chose to illustrate his encyclopedia of all serious occult philosophy would need to understand every aspect of his magical system, thelema. Bax introduced him to Frida Lady Harris, the wife of a prominent liberal politician who had established herself with moderate success as an artist. In a letter to his European representative Carl Germer, Crowley mentions that Harris's paintings typically sold for £20 to £30, which is the equivalent to £1,500 to £2,000 today. So not bad for a society lady. She may seem a curious choice, but despite her role in London society, Harris had been interested in many aspects of esotericism long before she and Crowley were introduced, albeit without any formal training. Accordingly, she joined both his magical orders and applied herself to his studies. Waite determined to rectify the conventional archaisms of the past in accordance with what he calls the secret tradition concerning the tarot and the secret doctrine contained therein. However, he was keen to stress that he was only following some part of it without exceeding the limits which are drawn about matters of this kind and below to the laws of honour. All initiates into the Golden Dawn swore an oath to safeguard the secrets of their teachings or suffer dire consequences. The card definitions of the minor arcana that Waite includes in the pictorial key to the tarot are brief and high level, with none of the astrological and colour correspondences as defined in Book T. So it can be argued that Waite has not broken his oath. Nevertheless, in the scathing review of the pictorial key he wrote for his order's periodical, The Equinox, Crowley accuses him of doing so, even though he had already included the Golden Dawn attributions in his table of correspondences in Liber 7.7, published in 1909. And he subsequently reproduced Book T in its entirety in The Equinox, but that was a couple of years later. The Rider-Waite-Smith tarot was unusual because, as Waite says, the minor arcana are the first in modern, but not all times, to be accompanied by pictures, in addition to what is called the pips. That is to say, the devices belonging to the various suits. These pictures respond to the divinatory meanings, which have been drawn from many sources. In contrast, Crowley opted for plain cards with their astrological and other attributions and occult titles. Many commentators believe Smith was far more deeply involved in the creative process than she is credited with. However, Waite maintains that he alone was responsible for the symbolism employed in the card designs. Aware of Smith's abnormally psychic abilities, he was concerned she should not be picking up casually any floating images from his own or another mind, and she had to be spoon-fed carefully over the priestess card, over that which is called the fool, and over the hanged man. Waite wanted to ensure that the designs, especially those of the important trumps major, observed the secrecy required for certain greater mysteries in the paths of which he was travelling. Therefore, it is almost certain that Waite oversaw the design for the entire deck, and Smith's artistic realization notwithstanding, the symbolic interpretation could only have come from him. Only inner order initiates received Book T, and as we have heard, Smith never progressed beyond the outer order. To quote religious historian Stuart Sudacum, it is inconceivable that Waite would have simply handed Smith a copy of an inner order document and told her to improvise. He took his oaths very seriously, and this would have been grounds for expulsion from the order. It is more likely that Waite micromanaged the entire process with his usual uncompromising sense of academic rigor and attention to detail. Admittedly, there are minor discrepancies between Waite's texts and Smith's designs, such as the Ace of Cups, where Waite's description states there are 4 streams flowing from the cup, as opposed to 5 in Smith's illustration. Tarot designer and scholar Robert Place draws attention to other anomalies, citing the 6 of Swords, which depicts a man navigating a punt. Waite describes the water as smooth, but as Place observes, the water is smooth on the viewer's left and choppy on the viewer's right. It is different on each side of the boat, which suggests another meaning. However, the choppy water could just as easily be attributed to the movement of the punt pole. But these discrepancies are only minor and in no way detract from the overall imagery or the interpretations provided by Waite. Taking into account his acknowledgement of Smith's psychic ability, her allegiance to his independent and rectified right, and her own spiritual beliefs, I would argue that Waite trusted Smith to manifest his esoteric vision. Nevertheless, he would have considered her designs carefully. And had there been any major departure from his concept of the cards, these would have been addressed prior to publication. 30 years later, Crowley maintained a similar level of scrutiny over the design process of the Thoth Tarot. However, unlike Waite, he had no issue with floating images, and indeed admitted that each card was immensely beyond anything he had ever contemplated. And as you will hear, their collaboration was highly interactive, as evidenced by their correspondence. Smith did her research, and like many of her occult contemporaries, spent time in the British Museum looking at their tarot collections. It is almost certain that she would have seen the reproductions of the Solar Busca Tarot with its illustrated pip cards. There are striking similarities to the Rider-Waite-Smith 3 of Swords, which we saw earlier. Harris also spent time researching in the British Museum, where she tried to find a bloody hand to fit the sword, but found only oriental scimitars which are too curved to hold. I see the conventional sword is much thicker, but it would not cut air, only bread and bacon. Harris had a particularly quirky sense of humour, and her correspondence is littered with cartoons and humorous observations. She later wrote to Crowley telling him, "Someone has lent me a genuine flail, a lovely instrument of solid wood, most difficult to manage." She includes a sketch of the flail in her letter, which he subsequently painted, held by the Knight of Discs. Crowley's original idea was simply to get hold of the best available old pack and have them redrawn with just occasional corrections or emendations, but he expected to stick very closely to the equinox descriptions as far as the court and small cards were concerned. Smith completed her commission in less than 6 months, and Crowley anticipated his project would take a similar length of time. However, Harris persuaded him to create a complete set of all 78 cards, as he openly acknowledged. "It is entirely due to your genius. It is you who have goaded me into getting the heart out of the whole business and taking each card separately as an individual masterpiece." Considering the Book of Thoth was Crowley's last major magical work, crediting Harris as the genius behind the cards is a significant endorsement of her contribution, but it would take nearly 5 years to complete the project. Crowley and Harris spent days either in Chiswick or at her Richmond studio, with him dictating card descriptions and producing concept sketches for some of the designs, one of which is outside in the exhibition. Crowley soon found the Book T card descriptions unsatisfactory, saying, "I do not find the astrological attributions very informative, and there is no evidence sense in the sequence of the cards." He was particularly unimpressed with the apparently random naming conventions employed for the court cards. Accordingly, he started writing his own commentaries, determining that the court cards should be knight rather than king, queen, prince, formerly the Book T knight, and princess, to represent the series father, mother, son, daughter, thereby ensuring the balance between male and female principles. The father is knight because he is represented as riding on a horse. As stated earlier, Crowley determined that the minor cards should be plain cards with their astrological and other attributions and occult titles, rather than the pictorial images of the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot. Each of Harris's numbered suit cards have stylized images of wands, swords, discs and cups, the symbols for the corresponding planet and sign of the zodiac, and a single word conveying the divinatory meaning. For example, the Six of Discs, on display here at the Warburg, has the planetary symbol for the moon in the top center of the painting and the zodiac sign for Taurus underneath the central motif. The card denotes success. As Crowley says in the Book of Thoth, the 6 discs are arranged in the form of a hexagram, which is the Madder of dawn, and without are 3 concentric circles, golden yellow, salmon pink, and amber. The planets are shown as discs irradiated by the sun in their center. This sun is idolized as the rose and cross. The rose has 49 petals, and you're very welcome to go and count them afterwards. The colour correspondences employed in the suit cards were also specified by the Golden Dawn, and Harris, the perfectionist, was determined to achieve the right shades specified for each card. We have been using the colours belonging to the ruling planet and zodiacal sign. Is that all right, or do I also combine the colours which can be used, such as in the Two of Cups? I see I could have used pure soft blue-grey, blue pearl grey, white flecked red, blue and yellow, as well as the colours for Venus and Cancer. Please let me know before I begin the Three of Swords, as it gives me more scope. When war was declared in 1939, Harris left her husband in the capable hands of their servants in Chiswick and decamped to the Cotswolds, where she was converting a ramshackle stable block into an artist's studio with basic accommodation. During the building work, she lived in a caravan in the orchard. Meanwhile, Crowley took over her rooms in Richmond. Harris's witty account of their collaboration during this period, presented as an illustrated reimagining of The Frog Who Would a Wooing Go, is on display outside, and soon to feature in a limited edition chapbook produced by Strange Attractive Press, with foreword by Jonathan. Wartime privations made it difficult to travel or even use the telephone, so their exchanges were chiefly by correspondence, with extensive discussions about the design process as well as her magical studies. Harris was realistic about what could and could not be achieved within the limitations of paper size and available materials. In one letter, she chides him for describing the sun card as simple. And then you say you want 1, a sun, rayed and nebulae, 2, a rose, 3, a spectrum, 4, 12 signs of the zodiac in pictures, 5, twins, 6, green hill, 7, wall, 8, python's scales, 9, druid stones. I don't think it is enough for a large space like 16.5 by 10.5 inches. But she got there. Although Harris understood that she was commissioned to manifest Crowley's vision of the Thoth Tarot using the symbolism and imagery he specified, it became apparent that she saw certain elements differently, particularly the representation of deities in human form. To Harris, they have no individual forms and faces. Those appendages are stuck on afterwards to please you. Crowley dismissed this as merely symptomatic of modern soul sickness and a lack of confidence in one's creative powers. Harris' replies begins, "As usual, you have stated your case lucidly and beautifully and convincingly, and everything you say is apparently true." But she insisted, "My gods have no human forms, only curves, angles, and light, movements, colour, sound. And when I draw, the moment I fall on one that is familiar to me, I bend the knee and shout, 'Holy, holy, holy.'" But if some sort of physical manifestation was required, she told Crowley, gods and goddesses could be done just as well in giraffes. Harris had a special fondness for giraffes, including them in a fake family crest on her letter heading. She even had giraffe-shaped handles on her drawing room doors and decorated the inside of a wardrobe with giraffe motifs. And it is entirely in keeping with her character that she should create a painting to support her argument. I give you the divine giraffe. This painting in the York family's private collection is generally assumed to be a rejected tarot design, but I believe this is a deliberate attempt to prove her point. At this time, Harris was working on the Magus card, represented by our old friend Mercury, whose duties included escorting the dead on their onward journey. The fish is also associated with resurrection or reincarnation, and as Crowley states in the Book of Thoth, is sacred to Mercury because of its cold-bloodedness, its swiftness, and its brilliance. There is, moreover, the sexual symbolism. This again recalls the function of Mercury as the guide of the dead and as the continuing elastic element in nature. Of course, this could be just a very elaborate piece of artistic mischief, but taking into account his significance in the Book of Thoth, I believe this is a genuine portrayal of Mercury guiding the dead and releasing their spirits back to the ether. And if you compare it with the final version of the Magus, there are some similarities. At the same time, Frida was actively involved in promotional activities using the Harris's contacts in the art scene to identify potential exhibition venues, publishers, and sponsors. As a result, she reached agreement with Nicholson and Venn to stage an exhibition in their Oxford galleries. But as she told Crowley, this involved using her social position foully. Because of his notoriety, she insisted Crowley should stay away and they should both remain anonymous. She prepared hand-tinted black and white photographs, initially postcard-sized, as promotional material for prospective sponsors and printers. She subsequently produced 22 full-size reproductions, again hand-tinted, consolidated into a single scrapbook which could be used as a portfolio when approaching potential publishers and sponsors. The scrapbook was compiled before the final designs were agreed. Here you can see a rejected version of the Magician before it was renamed to the Magus, and Adjustment before it was renumbered 8. And this scrapbook again is in the York family private collection. Harris also organised a programme catalogue and sent Crowley the proofs. Initially, he was horrified. No title, no layout, no word of what the show was about, full of bad grammar and misspelling, ill-typed, single-spaced, full of italics, pages of complete obfuscation. I have no memory of so black a rage as consumed me for the past 5 hours. He fired off a telegram instructing her to stop work on spendthrift abominations, come quickliest, use my draft catalogue professionally edited, or count me out altogether. Duly summoned, Crowley says that Harris blew in, and somehow over an A1 dinner she convinced him to correct the proofs. Despite her precaution, the gallery cancelled the show anyway, and Crowley had to find a new venue at short notice. The exhibition was relocated to the Randolph Hotel, but due to a breakdown in communications, Crowley only found out through third parties and was understandably upset. However, when Harris finally came to see him, he grudgingly admitted she'd behaved splendidly. But her failure to post a sandwich man outside N&V meant that so many people, some of whom had come long distances, failed to see the show. It really is no pleasing some people. The following March, Harris staged another exhibition for Chipping Camden's Battleship Week fundraising campaign. Again, Crowley stayed away, but she wrote telling him about the visitors and how they responded, including having to explain the meaning of lust to a group of small children. What she did was ask them to imagine the most luxurious and tasty and rich chocolates you could ever taste in your life, and then said, and that's the meaning of lust. Well, maybe it is, but I'll leave that one with you as well. But then, for some strange reason, she staged not one, but 2 London exhibitions without Crowley's knowledge, again concealing his involvement, but openly declaring herself as the artist. When he saw the reviews in the papers, he was beside himself with fury, and his relationship with Harris deteriorated, and he seriously considered taking legal action. To Crowley, this was not just an insult to him, but to Mercury, whom of all the gods is the easiest to offend and the hardest to propitiate. In time, Harris and Crowley's differences were resolved, and presumably Mercury was propitiated so they could press on with finalising the Book of Thoth and raising sponsorship. Harris took on the task of collating prospectuses and what she calls oodipiferous letters to potential subscribers, which she sent to Crowley asking him to look them through and decide for yourself which are duds. When Crowley challenged her list of addressees and threatened to send everything back, she lost patience. Ye gods, how do you know all these people are dead? Have you murdered them? I haven't, though I would gladly. What I marked asked included many people who actually sent checks, so don't roar at me and don't send the blasted envelopes back. The Book of Thoth was finally published in 1944. Sadly, Harris was bitterly disappointed with the proof copy, especially the colour reproductions and the binding, and she proposed that the colour plates were either removed or redone with individual hand-tinted black and white images. We're talking about 100 copies here. Needless to say, Crowley dismissed this as a long grouse from FH with crazy suggestion I am to tear out the plates and say sorry. It's unimaginable. And as far as he was concerned, all admire Tarot bar Frida, who wrote another miserly, selfish letter of silliest vanity. Interestingly enough, Pamela Coleman Smith had been equally disappointed in the quality of the colour reproductions of her work, telling Stieglitz they were printed in colour by lithography, pitiably badly. Thankfully, Harris was delighted with the final product, telling Crowley, if the ideas you presented to me had not been stimulating, if you had not expressed to me in many poetical images what you wished to convey, I could never have attempted anything. And although she created the tarot in accordance with Crowley's representational requirements rather than her own, she told him, if we haven't made the Philosopher's Stone, I feel I have extracted something which is precious to me.